Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. There are agendas available on the back of the table, or in the back of the room on the table. You can also follow along on the district website. There will be one opportunity to address the board before it enters a work session. A sign-up sheet is located on the table on the back of the room, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board, and a timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We do not have any public comments this evening. 4.1, a resolution to suspend Robert's Rules of Order. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And 5.1, board member professional development. And with that, I would like to call Anitra up to the podium to address our speaker this evening, or introduce.
Good afternoon. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker of the evening that's going to be doing our professional development. They are from Kaleidoscope Youth Center. That is Ohio's largest and longest serving organization in Ohio, solely dedicated to supporting LGBTQIA plus youth ages 12 to 24. Our presenter this evening will be Lane Sherrill. They are the Community Education and Research Manager. Lane is a recent addition to the Kaleidoscope team. They graduated from the University of Iowa with a Bachelor of Arts in English and Human Rights. They led the Ohio Thrives Needs Assessment that focuses on the intersection of race, developmental disabilities, and LGBTQ plus identities. Lane also facilitates workshops for professionals caring for LGBTQ plus youth. They previously worked with Iowa Legal Aid on their Intimate Partner Violence Project and at the Iowa Nonprofit Resource Center. When not working, Lane loves to bake bread and go for long walks with their dog. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Lane Sherrill.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Is this working? Oh, it's working. Okay. Everybody can hear me then. So, yes, my name is Lane Sherrill. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Community Education and Research Manager at Kaleidoscope Youth Center. Oh, thank you. There we go. So, as Anitra said, Kaleidoscope is the largest and longest-serving organization in Ohio dedicated solely to serving and supporting LGBTQ plus youth. We opened in 1994 as a crisis line and have since turned into the organization that we are today. We serve youth in a number of ways. Our most recent is the the Community-Based Wellness Department. In this department, we serve youth ages 16 to 24 who face housing crisis issues. We do this through wraparound case management services, providing clothes, food, toiletries, sleeping bags, tents, rental assistance, and then finally emergency housing assistance if needed. We're most well known for our drop-in center, which is open for youth ages 12 to 21. Youth can come on their 12th birthday and age out on their 21st birthday. When they are at Kaleidoscope, they can participate in affinity groups and discussions where we talk about gender identity and sexuality, but they can also come and enjoy movie and pizza night and creative art club and just be a kid around other kids and create community among one another. And then our last little piece is the Community Education and Outreach Department, which I am a part of. And our goal is to extend the safe space we create at Kaleidoscope into other areas of our youth's lives. Sometimes youth will come into the center and we will be the only affirming adults that they encounter in a single day. And we go out into the world and teach professionals how to interact with them and care for them so that we're not the only ones. So before we start talking about this community, we need to talk a little bit about context, which is one of historical inequality. So we know that from 1953 to 1972, the American Psychiatric Association categorized homosexuality as a mental illness that needed to be cured. And it wasn't until 2015 that we saw the legalization of gay marriage. And now it's under fire once again. So these slides say historical, but all of this is happening today. It's not old, it's right now. And because all of this is so recent, there's a lot of discrimination and stigma surrounding LGBTQ identities. And we like to think that because our youth are young, they're not experiencing it in the same ways that adults do. But we know that's not true. They're interacting with our institutions every day, so they similarly experience racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, the list goes on. And one ism that we get on a soapbox out about at Kaleidoscope is adultism. So a lot of people have heard of ageism, which we typically associate with discrimination against older folks in the workplace. Adultism is the reverse of that. It's discrimination against somebody on the basis of their youth. And so in order to demonstrate that, think about a young person who says, I dislike being called a boy because I'm a girl. And if they're a cisgender child, we'll get into terms. Cisgender means your gender identity aligns with the sex you were assigned at birth. So you were born a boy and you identify as a man, you're cisgender. Transgender means that your gender identity doesn't align with the sex you were assigned at birth. So you were born a boy, and today you identify as a woman or someone who's non-binary, and so you're transgender. Adults will criticize young people coming out because they're too young to know. We've all heard that, right? You're too young to know, you're too young to do this. But at Kaleidoscope, we believe every person is the expert in their own identity. And so when a youth comes out to us or tells us something about their identity, we believe them, because we could never know them better than they know themselves. So on today's agenda, we're going to do Gender 101, which is essentially what do all the letters mean. We're going to talk about affirming language and language to avoid, an application for what might be useful for y'all going into the new school year, and then we'll have Q&A if there's time. But before we get into that, I have a little bit of a warm-up for us. So this is called Imagining Transgender. If you're comfortable, I encourage you to close your eyes, but I'm going to read this to you. It's about a page long, and then we're going to talk about it. I would like you to imagine with me an average day as a young person who is transgender, around the age of 7 years old. If you currently identify as a woman, please imagine that everywhere you go, the people around you treat you as if you were a little boy. You're expected to act and dress like a boy. Everyone refers to you using male pronouns and nicknames: he, him, his, little man, buster, champ, or son. Even though you know in your heart and mind that you are a girl, everyone around you insists that you are a boy and demands that you act accordingly. If you currently identify as a man, please imagine that everywhere you go, the people around you treat you as if you were a little girl. You're expected to act and dress like a girl. Everyone refers to you using female pronouns and nicknames: she, her, sweetie, girly, or darling. Even though you know in your heart and mind that you are a boy, everyone around you insists that you are a girl and demands that you act accordingly. When you get out of bed in the morning, you survey your closet, and you aren't happy with any of the clothing options you see. These clothes make you feel really uncomfortable and upset when you wear them. Your parents tell you to hurry up and get dressed, so you pick the clothes that are the least uncomfortable. They make you feel more like yourself. When you get on the bus in the morning, some of the other kids tease you. They say mean things like, "What, are you gay or something?" And why do you dress like that? Other kids ignore you. You feel isolated and alone. Once you get to school, you are asked to line up by gender, and you consistently get yelled at for where you go. And the teacher tells you to stop causing problems and get in the correct line, or they will call your parents. During recess, the other kids group together by activity, but you have a hard time choosing. When you do what you really want to do, it results in more teasing. You are sad, frustrated, and confused. Imagine now that you are 14. For the past few years, your body has been changing in ways that are profoundly uncomfortable. You're starting to have sexual feelings and fantasies, which are confusing because it feels good, but it also feels uncomfortable. You've asked your close friends questions to see if they have similar feelings, but so far no one else has had a similar experience. At the same time, everyone else is suddenly interested in hooking up and dating, and that feels overwhelming. Sometimes you feel like you should just hook up or date so that people will stop harassing you about whether or not you are gay. And besides, you really want to be in a relationship, but things are so overwhelming. You know that you are attracted to one gender, but think that you might also be attracted to the other gender. Maybe all of this discomfort is because you are gay. You seek out information online about being gay, but somehow it doesn't seem to fit. You found a transgender teen support forum, and a lot of what you find there, it makes sense, but it's super scary. You wish that someone could understand where you are coming from, explain why you feel this way, and help you figure out how to make it stop feeling so bad. You can't talk to your parents about this. Over the years, you've noticed your parents saying little things here and there about how transgender people are freaks, and how they would never let their kid do that. You're afraid of how they will react if you tell them, and life is hard enough as it is. You don't want to risk their rejecting you because you just aren't sure that you'll be able to handle it. Besides, you know that your parents are struggling for money and dealing with your aging grandparents and your siblings. You don't want to add to their burden when they're already so stressed out. Every day starts to feel like a battle, and you are exhausted. You're feeling increasingly depressed and start looking for things to help make you feel better. You consider experimenting with drinking and drugs, or maybe cutting, anything that might help. You see the It Gets Better videos online, but frankly, you just can't see how that can possibly be true for you. Take a moment now to reflect on how you're feeling. When you're ready, please open your eyes. So some questions to consider after that. What feelings came up for you as you listened to this story? Specifically, what might you be feeling if this was your consistent experience in the world? Y'all can feel free to toss out some words if you feel so comfortable.
Confused, uncertain,
Alone,
yeah, unsafe,
anxious,
Frightened.
What might some examples of places in the story where an ally could have intervened to provide support?
lots of places, including, I'm thinking about when they were little and the teacher, right? The teacher could have done something quite different there if they'd been an ally.
Good evening. My name is Erin Upchurch, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a social worker and the executive director of Kaleidoscope Youth Center. And so, Lane, you're asking where allies could have been supportive. And you said the teacher. What kind of things do you think the teacher could have done?
Well, a few things. One is, if I'm remembering correctly, having kids line up by boys and girls, like in the first place, right? Why, to really think about why is that happening? Is that really a necessary thing in the first place? But also just that reaction of, stop causing trouble, right? Get in the right line. That's not something an ally would say.
Yeah,
It's not hearing what the child needs.
Absolutely, and it's hard because we know, I can only imagine with third graders, whatever age really, but like getting kids together to do something and like, don't cause trouble, like that, it really means don't cause trouble. But the young person doesn't attach it to anything other than they're talking about me. And then I love what the line, that's one of the most simple things I think any adult can do with young people is find a different way to put us in categories. There are so many ways to have a young person, or even adults, choose something. We don't have to throw gender out there. I think it's probably one of the easiest things that a teacher or adult could do with kids.
Anyone else? Any more ideas where an ally could be helpful in the course of that day? Maybe the parents.
Well, I'm thinking about yeah, parents in lots of ways, but even as simple as like what's in the closet, right? And letting someone choose the clothes that they feel comfortable in to populate their closet.
Before you go on, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned that there are a number of different ways that we can group people. And I'm sitting here thinking, honestly, racking my brain, and I'm thinking to myself, what are some of the other ways that are inclusive, that are non-discriminatory, that we can group people? Because as I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you just took away, if you take away gender, that's most of my experience, especially as it relates to kids. So we're going to do it by age or by gender. So can you share with us, with me, what are some of the other ways that we could group people?
Birthdays, alphabetical, favorite color, favorite sport. Yeah.
Eye color,
Oh, eye color.
All right.
shirts, color of shirts they have on that day, right-handed, left-handed.
Okay.
Even just counting off.
Right. Good question.
Anything, how many activities do not require the use of gender when putting people into groups, regardless of age, actually? It's very rare that that's even necessary.
Good question.
Thank you.
So this is our gender triangle. It's going to help us understand the difference between gender identity, gender expression, and gender attribution. So we'll start at the bottom left-hand corner, which is body. I think we all understand that. The day you're born, the doctor picks you up and says usually it's either a boy or a girl. So you get that marked on your birth certificate. And as you grow, your body changes due to genetics, hormones, chromosomes, and then whatever, reproductive organs you have when you're born. Attribution is how society sees you. In our society, we're trained to categorize people based on stereotypes that we're all familiar with. So we think, somebody has facial hair, so that must be a man. Maybe that person has a deep voice, so they're a man. Maybe they have breasts, so they're a woman. And so we use these kind of stereotypes to think, what box does that person go into? And then expression is how you choose to manipulate everything about how others perceive you. So maybe you wear high heels and makeup or slacks. Maybe you try to naturally lower your voice. Or maybe you take hormones or get gender-affirming surgery. But gender-affirming surgery and hormones are not always accessible and not always wanted by all trans people. So we need to remove the idea that to be trans you have to transition, because that's not the case. All you need in order to be trans is to have that gender identity that doesn't align with the sex you were assigned at birth. And gender identity in the center here is not connected to this triangle, because regardless of what is going on outside of you, gender identity is something that is yours and yours alone. It's something you know to be intrinsically true about yourself. So you might think, if you're a man or a woman now, at what point did you realize you were a man or a woman? Maybe it's something that has just always been, and you never questioned it. And that's amazing. That's so wonderful. But for a lot of trans and non-binary folks, it's a long process of questioning and doubting and doing Google searches late at night when you're alone to try and figure out why it is that you feel different until you eventually come to a place of understanding and acceptance. Any questions about all of those topics before we move on?
Yes.
I love it.
I don't know if you have the answer to this or not. Do we know, in terms of our sexual maturity and development, where typically in that process does gender identification take hold? Is it so? Yeah, I'm looking at. So, is it usually around age 10 or 11? That's usually when it's set and people know, or do we just not know the answer to that question? Does that make sense?
I think I understand the question. So in terms of when do you figure out what you are, kind of?
Yes. Typically, when do we figure out, yes, I go in this box?
It's different for every person.
Okay.
Yeah. So you might, oh yeah, go for it.
From a child development perspective, our gender identity is pretty much within us between the ages of 3 to 5. We just don't think about it unless there's a variance.
Okay.
And that's just based on how we see ourselves. So if you think of like I don't know if you've been in the store and like a 4-year-old will walk up like, I'm a girl, what are you? And because they're just learning around gender and parts and who people are in the world. And so it's like 3 to 5 when it's just an intrinsic sense. And then when you get into early adolescence, when there's secondary sex characteristics, and then it kind of becomes either affirmed or there becomes maybe an onset of discomfort based on what they were experiencing when they were younger and growing up.
Okay. Thank you.
So now we're going to get into what do all the letters mean. Right here we have queer, which is an umbrella term for every identity that is not straight and not cisgender. So it is a fraught word, and I have a slide dedicated entirely to the word queer.
Okay.
But for now, just know it's not right. So on the left, we have sexualities. And sexuality is, you can think of it as who you go on a date with. And then on the right, we have gender, which is who you go on a date as. Gender identity is yours and yours alone. And sexuality is often influenced by factors about the people that you would like to date or go out with, have a relationship, what have you. So under sexualities, we have L for lesbian. Lesbian is typically a self-identified woman who is attracted to other self-identified women. We have bisexual, we have G, which is typically used for men. So a self-identified man who is attracted to other self-identified men. Gay is also an umbrella term of sorts. And bisexual, which is someone who is capable of attraction to 2 or more genders. Typically, we think of bisexual as someone who's attracted to men and women, but it's not necessarily split like that. You could be attracted to women and non-binary people. There's more than 2 genders, so it just means capable of attraction to 2 or more genders. And then on the right, we have T for transgender, which again means your gender identity does not match the sex you were assigned at birth. Okay. Questions about terms? What questions are there? We have a couple more on the next slide.
Okay, yes. I know you're going to be real sick of me by the time you get through your presentation. So you said there are more than 2 genders. Can you unpack that a little bit, or is that coming up?
It is coming up, but we can take a second right now and go through it.
Okay.
Yes. So typically we hear the argument that there are only 2 sexes, right? Male and female. But that's biologically untrue. There are intersex people who are known to have characteristics that make it hard to categorize them at birth. So chromosomes, hormones, and external and internal genitalia. So scientifically, there are more than 3 genders, and therefore the argument that there are only 2 genders does not follow. So we'll get into the more of the genders. So we have male, female, transgender, and what direction, and then non-binary, which is kind of a catch-all category, and that's really when this presentation starts to get confusing. So, does that help?
Yes, yep.
What is the proportion, the percentage of people who are born with both male and female genitalia?
I believe it's 1 to 2%.
And it really is around like a mixture of reproductive parts, and so it's not just genitalia, it's also
Right.
the reproductive internal organs. It also can be like chromosomal and hormone, so it can be a little deeper than just what the genitalia is.
So it's 1 to 2%.
So pansexual, another sexuality. The prefix pan means all. So someone who is pansexual is capable of attraction to all genders. But that does not mean they are attracted to all people, just like not all women are attracted to all men. That's not how it works. So someone who is pansexual is just capable of that attraction. In other terms, gender is not important in their decision to date or be in a relationship with someone. Asexual, the prefix a, means none or lack of. So someone who is asexual does not experience sexual attraction to anyone regardless of their gender. But asexual is a spectrum within itself. So some asexual folks experience no sexual attraction ever to anyone regardless of their circumstances, what's going on. And other asexual folks experience some sexual attraction sometimes. And then we have the suffix romantic, because we can split up sexual and romantic attraction. Because maybe you are not sexually attracted to the same people that you enjoy emotional intimacy with. And this is based on the split attractions model. So it's not only sexual and romantic attraction, it's aesthetic, platonic, it goes on. But all of our prefixes that apply to sexuality can also apply to romantic identities. So you could be asexual and biromantic, pansexual and aromantic. And you can mix and match and make fun combinations. But if the romantic attraction is still confusing, think about it as who would you want to go through life with, do the hard parts with, be emotionally intimate with. And then sexual attraction, I think we all usually have a basic understanding of.
Question. You got a question?
Nope.
Okay. So, trying to figure out the good wording to make this clear. You included platonic. So, as I'm looking at that, if we're including platonic, is the assumption that all relationships are in some way sexual? Good. I think we need to make that kind of clear, because friendship and friends you want to spend the rest of your life with, there doesn't have to be a sexual component. Correct. Okay.
You don't have to have, a sexual, romantic, platonic component to all relationships. Just a way to differentiate the way we interact with other people. So we're getting a bit deeper into gender. As I've said, cisgender is someone whose sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. So you're born a man, and today you identify as a man, so you're cisgender. You were born a woman, and today you identify as a woman, so you're cisgender. And then transgender means somebody's sex assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. So perhaps someone is born a female, and today that person identifies as a man, or they identify as non-binary. So when we see transgender in popular media, we typically see binary transitions from one gender to another, typically based on that male-female binary. So a trans woman is a woman who is assigned male at birth. And a trans man is a man who is assigned female at birth. When we refer to transgender people, we always use the identity that they currently use. So a trans man is a woman who is assigned female at birth. Popular representations of transgender characters would be Laverne Cox or Elliot Page. You're looking at me like you don't recognize them. That's okay.
Just getting ready to say, I have no connection with either of those names.
That's all right. And then we have our non-binary category, which you can think of as a catch-all. So it's outside of the binary, as stated in the name. And within the non-binary umbrella, we have different categories like genderqueer, gender fluid, bigender, and agender. Now, based on all the looks you're making right now, I want to encourage you all to not feel discouraged. You don't have to understand any of this because it's really confusing. All you have to know is that these identities exist and you have to respect them. So we'll go through a brief little vocab of the non-binary identities. Genderqueer is someone who just does not, who is kind of queering gender, you know, playing with it, playing with those stereotypes we have of men and women. Gender fluid is somebody whose identity changes regularly, and that regular change is their identity, and that's okay. It's okay to not always know. Bigender is someone who identifies as both man and woman, or more than two genders at once. And then agender is someone who does not have a gender identity. So, that is confusing. What questions do you have?
I don't think we have the time. Let me just pick one, because this is profoundly interesting. Gender queer, you described it as someone who they're experimenting with different identities, is that right?
So, kind of.
Okay.
Genderqueer is somebody who kind of plays off of the male-female binary that we have in society.
Okay.
So maybe they're between male and female, or maybe they're somewhere off the spectrum entirely, and that is their identity.
What this could look like is a young person, or anybody who's androgynous, and you have no idea what their gender identity is just by looking at them. And that could be an intentional way of showing up in the world. Or perhaps it's somebody who mix and matches clothing with hairstyle and pronouns in their name. That could also be an example. It's really this person's experience of gender, either it's binary or none at all. And so that's kind of the whole point of it, though, is they don't, folks who are genderqueer or gender fluid don't ascribe to the male or female, to that binary. So
Gotcha.
it can be a mixture of experiences.
Okay. Now, how is that different from bigender?
Or agender.
It's really, when we get to the point around non-binary, it's around self-identification.
Okay.
I would say bigender and agender are becoming a little more popular with young people in general. But somebody who's bigender might feel like they experience both traditional masculine and feminine identity and characteristics. So they may say, like, I'm both, or I'm all of it. And the same thing with agender, they may say, I have no gender at all. And there's a lot of, especially younger folks, like, let's get rid of gender altogether. And it's just, it doesn't exist to them. They're just a person, a human, they're a name, and they go forth in that way.
So, as promised, our slide on the word queer. Queer has historically been used violently against the LGBTQ community. Right now it functions as an umbrella term for both gender identities and sexualities. It basically means anything other than cisgender or straight. And the word queer comes from a meaning of bucking the norm, or to turn the norm upside down. So it takes about 20 to 25 years for a term to be reclaimed by a community. And this process started for the word queer in the 1990s, when the organization ACT UP started advocating for better treatment and funding for AIDS research. And they claimed the word queer that had been thrown against them as their identity label. So it can cause discomfort. it typically does for folks who are older than me, and then folks who are younger than me are starting to use it really frequently as their identity label, because it provides a lot of breadth for them to experiment and change and move within their identity. And that's okay. Both of those can coexist. So I encourage everyone to use the word queer with caution. Know your audience. If you are not in the LGBTQ community, you don't ever need to say it. If you know someone who is comfortable with that identity label and they're comfortable with you using it, then that's fine. But always defer to that person before you use the word queer. Words not to use. So slurs that we should not use under any circumstances, anywhere, are the F slur for gay men, the D slur for gay women, and the T slur for transgender folks. Some people will make an argument that there is an appropriate time and place for this. And if there is, it is specifically in group usage. And not everybody in the LGBTQ community can use these words. For example, the F slur is still reserved for gay men. If they believe that there is a time and place to use these words, that time is never at work, at school, or around children. Because when you say them, you give other people permission to say them as well. Grammar issues we constantly see. Transgenders. No, it's not a noun. It's an adjective. Think about this. You wouldn't say, oh, there's a group of smarts. No, it's a group of smart people. So it's a group of transgender people. It's not a verb either, so it's not transgendered. Can't do it in the past if you live it every day. So if you're looking for a verb to describe this community, you might be looking for transition, which describes the medical or social transition that a lot of transgender people go through. And transsexual is a tricky word as well. A lot of our trans elders use it, and they absolutely can, because they paved the way, and so they can do whatever they want. But right now, transsexual among younger folks is being used to gatekeep the transgender community. It suggests that only folks who have undergone a medical transition can identify as transgender, and that is not how we operate. So, as a general rule, the word transsexual is on its way out. We talked about the word queer, which is sometimes okay. And finally, we have the word homosexual, which is also sometimes okay. It's kind of doing the reverse of the word queer. It's on its way out. Because when a lot of people think about the word homosexual, they think about protesters at pride parades holding up signs that say all the homosexuals are going to hell. So it's starting and has been used violently against this community. If you are someone who has regularly used the word homosexual, that's okay. You didn't know. But I encourage you to change out the word homosexual for the acronym LGBTQ. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but the more you say it, the more you'll get used to it. So, what are pronouns? Pronouns are the words we use when we don't use your name. So, when I started this training, I said, hi, my name is Lane, and my pronouns are they, them. When I leave tonight and you've forgotten my name, you'll say their presentation was interesting. They had great things to say. Some people use multiple sets of pronouns, like she and they, or he, she, and they. You can mix and match. If they do, usually people will have you alternate between them. We are starting to get away from the word preferred when it comes to pronouns, because it suggests that they're optional. If somebody gives you their pronouns, you should respect them every time. What to do if you misgender someone? Which happens. It's okay. Like I said, we were raised in a society that relies on binaries, typically to keep us safe. The first thing up here is apologize, and that has an asterisk. Because if you feel the need to apologize after misgendering someone, the apology should not last longer than it took you to make the mistake. When you apologize and get really upset about it, you're centering your discomfort over the person who you just insulted. Thank someone for the correction if they've corrected you after you misgendered them. And you can move on and do better next time. What questions do we have about misgendering? No? Solid. Great. And one thing we can all do is normalize pronoun use. One of the most exhausting parts about being an LGBTQ person is having to constantly advocate for yourself by yourself. So one thing allies can do is to normalize that conversation. You can introduce yourself with your pronouns. If somebody doesn't know what you're talking about, you've just given them a learning opportunity. And you've taken the weight off of another trans kid who's going to have to explain to them later on what pronouns are. You can use them in your email signature, on your business cards, on your Zoom name tag. Anywhere your name goes, your pronouns can also go. And then generally within schools, LGBTQ students feel safer and more supported with comprehensive anti-bullying and anti-discrimination policies. So this means explicitly stating gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation within any anti-bullying policies. Teachers and school staff who are supportive of LGBTQ students. Gender and sexuality alliances, which are the clubs schools have, where young LGBTQ kids can come and form community. And an LGBTQ inclusive curriculum. So providing books that talk about different family structures or talking about famous historic queer figures. So when we're creating inclusive spaces, there's a handful of things we need to remember. There is diversity within the LGBTQ community. A lot of folks think that there is no marginalization within marginalized communities, but there is still power among some in the LGBTQ community that can be weaponized against others. And so we need to recognize that people have a bunch of different identities that come together all the time. And so it's not just somebody's queer identity, it's their racial identity, their ability, their socioeconomic background. All of these things are informing their daily experience. Don't make assumptions. You wouldn't assume someone's name, so don't assume someone's pronouns. It's super weird if you assume someone's name. Be like, hey, Henry, and he's like, I'm George. Use that gender-neutral language. So instead of saying boys and girls, you can say scientists, artists, friends. I don't know, I completely blanked on this. Students.
I love
See, y'all
that.
got it.
Scholars.
Scholars. Support the coming out process, which I believe we have a whole slide dedicated to. Call out negative behavior when you see it. Don't let it sit and stand and kind of gain power over the person who's been victimized. And then lastly, this is not a taboo topic. When we're talking about gender and sexuality in schools, we're talking about different identities and the respect that we can have for them. We're simply providing students the opportunity and the language to understand people who are different than them. Some organizational best practices to consider. The comprehensive district policy that should apply equally to all schools. Making sure that all teachers feel that policies are enforced the same way at every school. Provide proactive training for all staff. That's everybody in the district. And it should happen before something bad happens, not as a reaction. Provide accessible resources for teachers. So think about what books can you put in the classroom? What resources can you give them so that they can better understand this community? Can you connect them with other teachers who maybe know more or would be more comfortable handling these situations? Normalize pronoun use, which we talked about. Asking for pronouns, giving your own pronouns. Perhaps teachers could put their pronouns up on the whiteboard next to their name, just to indicate that this is a safe space and the teacher has at least a basic understanding of the LGBTQ community. Accountability measures for non-compliant staff. Just like we wouldn't let bullying go on in young students, we shouldn't let it go on among our professionals. Everybody should be held to the same standards. And LGBTQ/pride inclusivity in the district calendar. So you could think about, instead of donuts with dad, you could do coffee with parents or some other catchy thing. And then that, I believe, is all I have for you today. So what questions do you all have?
So can you share with us, we went through LGBTQ. Can you share with us IA+.
Yes. So I is intersex, which we talked about, is those folks who are not easily classified as male or female. A is asexual, which we talked about, so not experiencing sexual attraction. And then plus, we've got P, it goes LGBTQIAP, pansexual, we talked about them. And actually, I'm pretty sure it now just goes on indefinitely.
There are, yes, several, but the whole point of the plus is it's acknowledging that gender and sexuality are fluid and expansive, and so we just want to acknowledge that and recognize it, and sometimes there are no words or definition, and that's okay too.
Share your thoughts with me a little bit about a different kind of intersection. The intersections that occur every day in our schools amongst people from different cultures and different backgrounds and different belief systems. And how do you see, like for instance, non-compliant staff? How do you see that playing out? This is more philosophical than anything else, but how do you see that playing out? For instance, when you work with individuals who come from very different backgrounds, very different places, and who have very different beliefs, what do you say to them? What do you mean by accountability when someone chooses to be non-compliant? It's a biggie, I know, and it's gray and multi-layered.
I'm going to hand it to you.
Do your best.
Do your best. That's scary, isn't it?
So I have realized that in doing these trainings, I'm never going to change anybody's mind if they don't want to learn. But I can at least give them the tools to be basically respectful and to basically understand these identities. And so, all right, I did my best.
I've been doing great all day. My question back is, well, how do you handle it when someone is non-compliant around race and ethnicity or religion in terms of being inclusive? How is that accountability offered and handled? And it should be, when we're talking about affirming students and families and cultures, it should be across the board, and it should be a non-negotiable approach to how schools and districts are being ran. So that's the question is, well, how does it happen with other differences, if you will?
Good answer.
Thank you.
So if we took the gender out of a lot of the issues, wouldn't that kind of take care of it as far as discrimination? So if you just treat everyone equal, I mean.
You should be president.
She is.
Of the world. No, I mean, and not to be flip, but yeah, when we add gender, it's tricky, right? Because it's like, let's take it out, let's get rid of it. And for some folks, that is a very real part of their identity. And I always like to say, we can just create room for people. We don't have to take things out or add things necessarily. It's not about that. It's just, I get to be who I am. I can exist here. My pronouns are she, her. I'm woman identified. I'm cisgender woman. And then I can be next to somebody else who has the complete opposite experience, and we can still be doing the same thing or be in the same place or have shared community. And so I don't know if it's about taking gender out. It's about expanding our experience of gender and how we allow other people to experience it as well.
Beautiful.
And I think one thing that makes me think about is the difference between equal and equitable. Mm-hmm. And we all, there are lots of conversations in society about race and, what's equal, what's equitable, and what does that mean in that context. But we can also bring that language to this context too, right? And it's a similar sort of activity. So it may be something that maybe doesn't seem equal because you're providing some additional support, but that's equitable.
Yes, absolutely. And if you think about it from an educational There it is. The light wasn't on. If you think about from an educational perspective, we talk about differentiated learning. It's no different. And you want those experiences. And, one tool that has been used, and I don't love that this happens, is sometimes for youth who are gender expansive or non-binary, they've been put on 504 plans because the schools or the teachers were unwilling to be affirming and inclusive. I do not endorse that practice at all because it's a slippery slope, but it's an example of equity and utilizing tools so that people can get their needs met. But I just want to repeat, I don't endorse that at all. And you're not doing anything extra. It's not special rights. It's not doing anything extra to make sure that you are utilizing someone's pronouns or affirmed name or choosing a different way to categorize or group folks. It's not doing anything extra. Nobody is actually getting away with anything. It's actually, again, back to that space of expansion. You're creating more room for students to experience belonging and affirmation.
Right. I would think that would be traumatizing on top of not being being recognized or seen, but being put on a 504 would be extra traumatizing.
Yes. And this was probably about 10 years ago that this happened, and it was the best tool for this student actually was at Dublin City Schools. It was the best tool for them to be able to participate in activities that align with their gender identity, to be in classes with their peers, like the, sex ed and health education. It was a tool, and that student had already been singled out and traumatized from other things that were happening. And so it's bad. It's a really bad practice.
Can you share with us, what are some of the things that you share with parents as they have a child, a young person that's going through this process? What are some of the, because we spend a lot of time talking about the students and the student experience from the parental side. What are some of the things you share with parents to help them love their kid and support their child?
So are you asking as Kaleidoscope Youth Center some of the things, or like within a school district and system? Because those may be very different.
Then both.
Great. Well, at KYC, we do offer parent groups, and we've got education available and information for parents who are feeling like they don't know how to support their young person. And that can be as simple as, loving them the same way you would any other child. And the questions of, well, what if it's just a phase? That, for me, it's always, well, can we love our kids through a phase? We love them through so many phases. That's what childhood is. It's multiple phases. But definitely providing information is a really key tool. I'm a parent. My youngest just graduated high school earlier this year. She's 18. And I have a son who's 20. And what parents need to know is what parents would need to know anyway, right? And so a young person who is questioning their gender identity or sexual orientation is not an emergency. An emergency is if they get harmed or hurt or maybe failing their class, but not their identity. And so if there's a family coming in and they are like, I don't know what to do, that would be referring them to places like KYC or other organizations. There's a whole list of resources where they can get that information. But in terms of being the adults, there's nothing to communicate to parents if a young person wants to use different pronouns or a different name than what might be on their school records. And I think that gets confusing for some folks. Did that answer your question, though?
Yes.
Okay. One more thing I'll add, I think, as leaders in the district, and even with teachers and school personnel, is being that unapologetic, non-negotiable kind of stand for inclusion, affirmation, and belonging for all students. It covers all students. And so it's really setting the stage and the standard for how we're going to operate here for our young people, for our students, so that they can thrive and be on those journeys in the most positive way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about your organization. So you said that the drop-in is for ages 12 and up. Do you work with kids younger than age 12?
We do. So our drop-in center is ages 12 to 20, Tuesday through Friday. We do have a group monthly for ages 12 and under. I believe we capped it at 8 for the youngest. We were doing just 12 and under, and we were getting 3 and 4-year-olds, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it's quite the disparity between a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old. And so it was just different. So the best practice, 8 to 12-year-olds. So we do have groups for them monthly and for parents and families. And I think this past Saturday, we had a couple of families that were there with younger kids that can come. And then we do have, and that's just our drop-in center, but we have special events. So we do a pride celebration in our parking lot. That's for all ages and families. We do a back-to-school event. This year was for ages 12 to 20, and COVID really messed up a lot of things in terms of who can be where and how many. But a lot of our public events are for all families and all ages. And then our case management, as Lane said, is 16 to 24. Our therapy is ages 12 to 24, and then our housing is 18 to 24.
What aren't we asking that we should ask?
I did have another.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No, you. All right. Can you talk a little bit about the statistics around kids that aren't supported in this realm?
I can. Do you have, I don't want to steal your. Okay. Okay, thanks. And so what we know, so for example, when we look at the LGBTQI plus population, those young folks are 120% more likely to be homeless than their peers, and represent about 40% of the entire homeless population. So in Central Ohio, actually it's Franklin County, there was probably about a little over 30,000 youth who were identified as homeless about 2 to 3 years ago in their point in time count. So if you do the math there, 40%, we're over, a little over 1,200 youth who are LGBTQ identified. And the main reason that those young people are typically homeless is lack of safety at home or in their family of origin, so they're kicked out. We also know when youth get kicked out of their homes, they're more likely to go to school. So then you've got those who are not, who are undereducated, not graduating from high school, and it starts this snowball effect. And so if you can't get a job that pays in a way that's safe, then we've got youth who engage in survival crimes. And so we know that young people are more likely to be in contact with the justice system. Then we look at from a mental health perspective, I think it's 63% of young people have attempted or thought about suicidal behavior. This is the Trevor Project, is a really great place for all those numbers and those statistics. And the research also shows that with just one supportive adult, it decreases the risk of self-harm, uncontrolled or unmanaged mental health symptoms, and suicide ideation significantly, just to have one supportive adult. And then if we get into like gender affirming care, and that also decreases those risk factors. And the one thing I think I'll just add here is if we're looking at like 40% if we look at homeless young people, we know that bisexual Black men or young adults are 83% more likely to be homeless than their peers. So you take that 40% out of the entire population, and then you add that part of the community, it's 83% more likely. And then again, when you look at homelessness, how that impacts young folks. So it's just this growing snowball effect. Yeah. What do you got? Yeah.
So it's 78% of transgender adults have made at least one suicide attempt.
Mm-hmm.
The national average is between 1 and 2% of adults attempt suicide. And 92% of those transgender adults attempt suicide before the age of 25. And so people get mixed up thinking that the mental health statistics are because it's a mental illness, but it's because of all the discrimination risk factors that Erin just talked about.
I used to be in private practice as a therapist, and I would say probably 95% of the folks, young people who came to me who were transgender, non-binary, didn't actually meet criteria for what's considered gender dysphoria because it didn't impact their functioning. Like, they were fine with who they were fine with their peer group. It was, the therapy was to deal with the way they were being treated from their family or people in the community. And so to that point, it's not a mental illness. Being LGBTQ in any capacity is not a mental illness. It's typically the symptoms are either organic and they were going to be there regardless of one's identity, and or the trauma from being rejected, ostracized, all the other negative things that are happening in their communities. Thanks for those numbers.
I guess the other question I would have is if people wanted to get involved with you guys, or like, how would they go about doing that? I'm assuming just reach out to you.
Well, we have our website listed here. I also brought some brochures with me if y'all would like some.
We also have volunteer opportunities. If people wanted to volunteer in the drop-in center, that's, they keep changing the time on me, but I think it's at 3. It's
3:30 to 5?
6.
Okay.
Yep, 3:30 to 6. I do know that. But that's an opportunity to be in that mentorship, positive adult, volunteering for special events. So we do Pride. We do Other Prom every year, which is this really fantastic experience. Where's prom? And youth come and they just have this amazing time. Again, pre-COVID, we had, this is 2019, we had close to 400 youth from across the state that attended, representing over, I think there's 70 schools across the state. And so it's very much just come as you are, ages 12. We do cap that at 20. But there's volunteers for those kind of special events. We do volunteer days of service for groups of people. So that could be, at your workplace. It could be your friends, your family, if people do that for their birthdays. And then, on our website, as Lane said, and all that can be found on our website, but there's also ways to, if you want to contribute financially or, buy things from our wish list. We have an event coming up on October 14th. It's our Unity Soiree, our annual fundraiser, at no cost, so you could certainly come to that. So yeah, there's a lot of ways. And then I also like to add, being involved in the community in a way that affirms young people. And so doing those things that signal being a safe person or a safe place, smiling at a young person, using their affirmed pronouns in their name, really just showing them love. Like, it's a really great way to do the work. As Lane said at the beginning, taking what we do and making sure it's available. That's something everyone can do. You don't have to work at KYC to do that.
So my question earlier, is there anything that we should have asked or that you would like to share?
I would be curious to know what challenges, if any, you all are having as a district, or situations that may have come up. How that's going.
You want to share?
I think what you see out there in this community and interaction with schools is something that we certainly have evidence of as well. I would say that we have a pretty good history with working with this community and growing understanding, working with families, working with students. As our tagline says, Westerville City Schools where you belong, and this board and leadership team take that to heart. That's one of the reasons we're engaging in this conversation. We've done training with all of our administrators with you all. We did training with our teachers with you all. We're just going to continue a growing understanding and appreciation. There was something you said earlier that really caught my attention, and it was, we're really trying to expand and creating more room for people to be who they are so they can feel like they belong. And that kind of generic description overlays on all of these other places we talked about in identity in terms of race, religion, all those pieces as part of a really diverse, so I'm borrow that one and will credit you whenever I use it, but that one really hit me as what we're going for here. So yes, we have a diverse community of students. We also continue to talk about, whereas this and most of the conversation focuses on students, But the fact of the matter is, it's also the families that support students who this may be part of the adult world at that table that we interact with. And it's also part of the employee group that we're bringing on board and the conversations and who we're seeing that want to be part of our school community. So our messaging about who we are and how we're going to work with a variety of people becomes really, really critical for us. And so we're just going to continue to grow our understanding and keep our arms as wide open as we can to as many people as we can.
I love that.
So one of the topics that we have been discussing is pronouns and trying to find a safe way to let children share that feels safe to them.
Is that happening already, or that's what you're trying to?
I feel like it's happening already. I think
Yeah.
we started the school year in a way where we try to be respectful to kids that wanted to share and kids that weren't ready to share yet, but just finding, you had mentioned some things before, put the name on the board and your pronouns, or put it in your signature line or something like that, but just letting kids know that there are safe adults to go to where, they can have that one person.
And it's amazing. What I've seen over time is the more that people practice using pronouns, like the more normalized it becomes. And while I don't enjoy that word necessarily, it's just the truth. And it's just like that's just a part of our conversation and our culture to say pronouns and to ask. And even today we had an all-staff meeting and we're going around the circle checking in, and people are still saying their pronouns. And some folks we've worked with for 4 or 5 years, right? But it's just part of the natural conversation. One of the reasons, and Lane talked great about why we use pronouns, and then also when people ask or push back, like, why do we have to do this? Another reason is so that you can be seen and engaged within your full humanity. And I think when people push back or feel uncomfortable saying, like, I also want to see you in your full humanity, and I don't want to make assumptions about you, it's another great way to do that. And as you said, when teachers or grown-ups do it, it makes it feel safer for youth who want to do it as well. They're watching us always, always.
This is a question that goes back to a little bit of conversation we had, but thinking about some of the really simple things but that come up all the time, right, in school, like dividing boys and girls, or, whatever those practices are. And we talked about potential sort of other ways to do that. Are there other things that, you all are aware of that happen in schools all the time that maybe just are so far under everyone's radar that, but are hurtful or potentially hurtful to members of the LGBTQIA plus community that you could bring awareness to now?
I have a very specific one that I recently heard from a young person at the center. They said they don't like it when teachers allow students to pass out other students' papers because it demonstrates what that student's grade was, and it can also out them if they're using a different name on their paper.
Yes.
It's a very specific.
It's so specific. I love that.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my first time hearing that. I love it. I think other things too around the boys and girls, like saying it. So if it's like, good afternoon, boys and girls, or just an assembly, hello, friends, and it's such a simple switch, and the people who it doesn't impact, they won't notice it, but the ones for whom it gives up more room, they notice that. Sometimes using the word siblings, instead of do you have a brother or sister, do you have any siblings? Or if we're talking, it's that language of if you're dating somebody. I don't know how that, it's been a while since I've been in elementary school, but, someone special, or tell me about your family, not like your mom and dad. Tell us about your family. Who lives in your home? What pets do you have? So it's all about that expansion. I think if you approach it from that way. And then also, I know the donuts with dads, that's tricky, because for parents, that is a really exciting thing to do with your kids, and we know not everybody has a dad, and that has nothing to do with gender identity and sexual orientation. And so just having, pancakes with parents or whatever it is, but just finding ways, thinking about the ways they create more room, whether it's a physical creation of room or just an expansion offered out there in the air for people to have that within themselves. And I think, we approach it that way, it's a lot easier to do. I think, having books and things available, during Black History Month, not, having LGBTQ Black folks there too, or for, Hispanic Heritage Month, like finding ways to incorporate and do that, be inclusive in that way. It doesn't just have to be during LGBTQ History Month. It can be because we exist all the time. I don't know, are there any other things that are like, people don't, bathrooms, I don't know what the bathroom policy is here, but if there's a way to have a private or gender-neutral restroom or all-gender restroom, those are great. Locker rooms. I was an athlete in school, and I remember sometimes it felt horrible to change in front of people, and I was in an affirmed locker room, so it wasn't about my gender identity. It just is uncomfortable to take your clothes off in front of other people. Now, what else? Yeah.
And so many of those things are, like you said, it's not just about kids or families in LGBTQ plus community, it's other kids too. So even switching to something like parents, well, there are a number of kids in our district who don't live with parents or don't have parents.
Exactly.
So families,
Yep.
or whatever it is. So it's really sort of a door into a bigger conversation about belonging and growing it. So I really appreciate, the particular points that you're bringing up to help us think through that.
Thank you for that. Coffee with caretakers. I know, I love alliteration in general, so I'm like, what else could go? Carrot cake. I like to also compliment young people, not in front of others because they'll be embarrassed, but if I see a young person, really any human, who's like expressing themselves in a way that I know people aren't going to celebrate, I love to I love what you're wearing today, or I love your hair, or whatever it is. And like I said, I do it privately because they might not want that attention, but it's such an easy way to affirm somebody. Nobody else has to know what's even happening. Yeah. Anything else?
What time is it?
7:12. Yeah. I do want to just appreciate you all for having us here. This is actually the first school board that we've been able to do these trainings in front of, which is something we wholeheartedly believe in. I always believe in going with leadership. That's where the change gets to start. And thank you for having us in with your, the rest of your team and the different schools. But as a board, I just want to commend you on the invitation and being present and engaged with us. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming and for sharing. It was really good. It's really good.
It was a team effort.
Anybody else? Comments? No?
I just wanted to echo, thank you very much for your time tonight and for sharing.
Okay, moving on to future meetings. 6.1, the board will meet in regular session on Monday, September 12th, 2022 at 6 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. And with that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes?
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And with that, we're adjourned.